Hello from Interhaptics. In this tutorial, we will go step by step creating a PS5 project in Unity. For time considerations, we will cut the loading assets part while keeping the same steps as when creating a project from A to Z. To develop for PS5, you need of course to have a developer account with Sony Interactive Entertainment and have at your disposition a PS5 development kit. So we created a blank 3D object and we switched the build target to PS5. Next, we open the package manager to add the Interhaptics Core SDK package, which you can get simply by copying the GitHub address from this video. After this, we add the Interhaptics for PlayStation 5 package on top from a private GitHub repository, which you can simply request from the DevNet portal in the Tools and Middleware directory. So next we can check the player settings for API compatibility level and active input handling, on which I will choose both the input manager and system package from Unity. But you can do as you like. There is already a sample scene in the Interhaptics for PlayStation 5 SDK package, which you can test for different haptic sources, such as spatial haptic source, event haptic source, and audio, or adaptive trigger controls with stiffness haptic materials for the PS5 DualSense. We will not delve deep into the sample scene, which can be played directly and tested on your PS5 dev kit once the packages are imported, as we recreate and explain most of its components in this new scene. So the first component is the haptic manager, which we create on an empty game object, and we add the haptic manager script. And next we have to add the haptic body part components on two game objects, representing the right and left side of the controller, which will receive the haptics. We add a rigid body box collider, but this can be basically tailored to your specific needs. We prepare the controller left and right game objects to be kinematic, and we uncheck the trigger from the box collider if it is there. And we will prepare for the first haptic source, which is specific to the PlayStation 5 ecosystem. We have to be sure that the haptic body parts are corresponding to the correct left and right controllers. So the first haptic source is the adaptive trigger control, which you can add simply from the inspector add component or from the component menu in Interhaptics and adaptive trigger control. This comes with a haptic source in which we have to put the haptic material, and basically can play this material on one or both of the triggers directly on awake, or it can be called by a public method, start trigger haptics or stop trigger haptics, depending on how you want to control these triggers. The haptic material containing the stiffness sensation can be easily modified in Haptic Composer, which you can download and use for free from the link in the description. Once the changes are done, as you can see, this can be easily modified from something very stiff to something very soft, or something which has bumps, until you reach the final position of the trigger. So once the changes are done, we save, and the material will be saved directly in the Unity project. Next, we will present the spatial haptic source, which can start haptics on trigger or on collision. We create a small cube with a box collider and a rigid body. Next, we add an object mover script from the demo scene, which will just move the cube between the two controller haptic body parts to activate alternatively the haptic material inside. As you can see, the activation is done on trigger, And once we hit play, we will see in debug mode that haptics are starting and stopping once they enter or exit the trigger. Next, we will create an audio haptic source. It is the same process. It can be added from inspector or from component Interhaptics. And this one introduces an audio source to the game object, which means that you can play audio and haptics in sync. We'll choose one of the sounds from the sound library, which is in the Interhaptics Core SDK package. And we'll choose the corresponding haptic material from the haptic materials library in the same SDK package. We'll uncheck play on awake on the audio source, and next we have to choose the settings for this audio haptic source and the haptic body parts on which the audio haptic source will play. Finally, we will present the event haptic source. So for this, we will create a new cube, but of course, for events, we don't need a box collider. And we can add the event haptic source the same way as before by inspector or through the component Interhaptics menu. For this as well, we can assign a haptic material from the haptic materials folder in the SDK package or create one. You can create one yourself. And normally we should have something like a script which tells us when to call the public methods from the event haptic source. But in this case, we will just toggle the play on start boolean check and the debug mode, which will show the messages in console even without making the build. So just on Unity start. The last step is, of course, making the build. As the developer NDA states, we are not at liberty to show the recordings on the PS5 dev kit, but rest assured that the console message is true and the haptics are correctly delivered on the PS5 DualSense controller. For any other feedback or information, we are available at interhaptics.com and on Discord, link in the video description. Thank you very much for following this tutorial.